Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So I actually already talked for about 15 minutes, and now I'm really frustrated because I only have like 15 more minutes to talk. What do I say? Okay, here I am. I've moved. I don't necessarily know where I'm going to film this. I can't find my dagger. The Goblin Prince was really interested in it, and like you unfortunately can't give weapons to small children. And so I don't know where it is. I know we haven't done one of these since like May, so probably a lot has happened and I don't know what it was. Oh, I worked this summer on a book called Kiss Your Devils in Los Angeles, which used to be the Untitled Hollywood Gothic and for a while was briefly called Fire Season. It was like the hardest first draft of my life. I think because so when it was Fire Season, I was envisioning it as a romance and I was pacing it like a romance. I was following romance beats. And the more I wrote it, the more I was like, this cannot be shelved in romance because it's very toxic, actually. I mean, I knew that. I knew of course, there's a truck backing up now. I don't have time to wait for silence. I knew that it involves a demon, right? And so initially it was going to be like a sweeter kind of love story than it actually is. It's kind of a monster fucker book. And so the more it leaned closer to horror, the more I was like, I think this is something else. I pitched the title to my editor, Dreamland, because the demon sometimes doesn't know if he's awake or asleep. The demon character, I should say, doesn't know if he's awake or asleep sometimes. And the subtitle was Kiss Your Devils in Los Angeles. And then we realized the subtitle is much better. So yeah, so I wrote that. It's terrible. I have like kind of clear ideas of how to fix it. I have strong ideas of how to fix it. I wouldn't say they're clear. This is why it's important to love revision though, because I'm about to dig back into it. I've been writing a bunch of short stories and stuff that I'm also still behind on. I have more work than I could possibly humanly finish. But yeah, so this book, it's edging closer to horror. It's a gothic romance, so romance is a huge part of it. But also, I kept running into the problem of like I can't make this character's decisions make sense. I can't make them feel logical. And it was like, well, maybe they're not. Maybe she's 22 years old and she wants to fuck a demon. You know, like maybe there is no smart way to frame this. And so I think I'm gonna use that. Like that's a key aspect of it. But also, I think sometimes people ask me like, how do I get what's in my head onto the page? And my answer usually is, you can't. Like you're basically trying to adapt from one medium to another. You're trying to adapt a daydream into a book, and that's very difficult to do. And you can't always do it. Some things just don't translate that way, and you just get like as close as you possibly can. A book can do different things than a daydream. So to me, I think this is one of those experiences where I almost wish I had adapted it into a film. I think adapting a daydream to a film is probably closer than a daydream to a book. But it's too late. I signed a contract and it's a book. So that's what's happening. Coming out October 15th is JANUARIES. This is my short story collection. About half of it is, cult classics that have been published other places, like my self-published fairy tale collections, like the best of those. And then half are completely new stories. One is like novella length and I have shoved it in here. Yeah, and it's a very beautiful book. The dedication is "This is my mixtape for you," which is a reference to the mixtape by Jack's Mannequin, but also because that's how I think of it, that this is a mixtape of me trying to I'm giving you a playlist, basically, in a love way. Someone has referred to it as a bedtime storybook for adults, which is also pretty much correct. And let's see. So Poe at Pole Arts did the interior illustrations. Lil Cora's busy, but obviously we love Poe. We are Poe stans in this house and every house. So this is an epigraph I'm particularly proud of. It says, "The whores may be unrelenting, but motherfucker, so am I," by Tumblr user Hello It's Bees. This was a real thrill for me to put in this book. And then here is one of the illustrations. This one corresponds with the story, Sensual Tales for Carnal Pleasures. And so all of the interior illustrations revolve around the original dedications that I wrote to my husband in the fairy tale collections, but obviously there were only 3 of those and there are 4 sections in this. So this is a new one I wrote that says, "For you, I will choose life." Then in, April 1st, Gifted and Talented. So after JANUARIES, this is the book I will be talking about. This is an ABM, which means advanced bound manuscript. So it's basically like the manuscript but bound. This gets sent to like people who are blurbing, versus ARCs are advanced reader copies, and those get sent to like reviewers and stuff. So they're a little bit more polished and formatted and stuff. This is my one ABM. And it's about the length of the Atlas complex. It has the tone, or it has the world of the Atlas 6, basically. Not really. It's a standalone. It is a lot. It has a lot to do with tech. I wasn't thinking of it this way when I wrote it. This book is really inspired by the Royal Tenenbaums. You could think of it as like Succession, but with magic, except I haven't actually seen Succession. I've seen the pilot. I watched the pilot and I was like, oh, this is absolutely my shit. And then I don't know, I got pregnant and like things fell off and I didn't get back into it. But I really love the movie The Royal Tenenbaums by Wes Anderson, and this is really inspired by that, and it will have Succession vibes. What was I? So I worked in startups, I worked in tech, and I ended up building this like magitech economy, and interestingly, I ended up being a lot more incisive about tech than I expected, because I don't know if you've noticed, but there are a lot of articles now about how innovation in tech is at like an all-time low. Not an all-time low, but it has certainly slowed down from where it was. And such that there are a lot more scams in tech. And I've been thinking about this because the Apple release was recently, and like Apple's doing a very interesting thing where it's going into like healthcare markets. Like they've improved their watch and the AirPods to be essentially medical devices, which is kind of, disrupting a different industry than the one we were expecting of like pop tech. And I've just been thinking about it because it also applies to the next book I'm going to write, which is called Euphoria. I can't talk about that right now because I am supposed to be working on the Gothic, and I'm too excited about the other book. I was trying to ask myself, like, what do I want from tech at this point? And the thing is, like, I want tech to go backwards. I think AI is stupid. This AI, like, is simply not smart enough for a lot of reasons. I won't go into them. I will attach some articles if you have a lot of time and want to read. But this generative AI is not smart enough to do what it promises, and I think this bubble will burst. But until then, it's just prioritizing profits over people, and that's annoying. So I'll just keep writing my little books about how annoying that is. The number one thing that I want my phone to do at this point in time is to remove me from like leaked data lists. Like if there was a phone that would remove me from scam caller lists, that is the number one thing that I want my phone to do, because we have reached a point where I do not answer my phone. If it's not a contact in my phone, if it's not my mother or my agent, it's not, or my husband, it's not getting picked up, which is like problematic, right? But it's like, it's either a scam call or they can leave a voicemail. And it's like, that's life now. And that's annoying. Like, why even have a phone? So yeah, I have mentioned before that there are people impersonating me on Facebook, and I can't do anything about it because I don't have a Facebook. And so just a reminder that the people who are impersonating me on Facebook are trying to sell you like marketing tools. Like they're trying to tell you that the reason that I'm on the New York Times bestseller list is because of some sort of marketing tool they can sell to you. And that is not true. There is no money going into marketing. Hopefully you can tell that this is not a professional endeavor in any sense. Moving along. Oh God, I have to leave in 5 minutes. Okay, so Olivie, I've always loved the nuance with which you've discussed relationships, especially with family. A big sister question. I'm not clear, but I think this is about their mom. So it says, she's my biggest supporter, obviously loves me, and also one of the most challenging parts of my life. I moved far away for a bit, which was helpful. Now I live near her again, and with that, we see each other so much more. I'm in my 20s, and it feels like we've been working on a relationship forever, and yet we always come back to the same types of challenges. I love my mother dearly, and she's making me feel crazy. Any advice? So one of the things that, like one of the biggest criticisms that I think is like valid-ish, like it's valid, about My Mechanical Romance, my young adult novel, is that a lot of people said there is no closure with the parents, or the parents don't apologize for the messes they've made. And, My Mechanical Romance has a lot to do with family conflict and family issues. And the characters, like you can definitely see in the flaws of the main characters how they've gotten that from their parents, and the things that their parents have done that have given them these coping mechanisms and survival techniques that are pretty flawed. And no, the parents don't apologize. Do you know why? Because it's very unlikely that your parents will apologize to you, and you have to go on with your life anyway. And and I think that part of the reason that I enjoy it's like it's a to me, it's a little bit of feature and a bug in writing YA, is that I want to write a world that makes teenagers and young people want to feel that it's worth being part of, that there are relationships that are worth pursuing, and that there's a lot out in the world that, as much as the world may suck, there are parts of it that are worth doing, and that your relationships with other people matter, and they might be imperfect, and there might be things that you cannot ever fix, but that doesn't mean they're not worth doing. And so I think that was the thing. It was just like, I wanted to be honest that, like, yeah, your parents aren't going to apologize to you. They might improve, but they still won't be perfect, and they can't undo the damage that they've done. And that's not the important part. The important part is what you can control, and what you can control is how you react. And all of which is to say, your relationship with your mother will always be complicated. It's another person who's like, this is a person who's in your life, who's very, very invested in you, but probably doesn't look at conflict the same way you do, probably doesn't understand love the same way you do, doesn't communicate that love in the same way. This is also a person whose relationship with you has been super dynamic and constantly changing. You used to be 100% like, you could not be alive without this person, right? Like, there was a point in your life where if they ever just like ignored you for a while, you'd die. But you've also turned into something that's completely separate from them. And I say this as a daughter and a mother, that it's confusing to watch, like, the little thing that you love for different reasons at different times. Like, you love this thing because it's like a piece of you and a person that you love, but then gradually it becomes its own thing. It gains sentience, and it's separate from you, and it has a whole life that's not yours, and it just moves farther and farther away from you because you're not the same person, and you were never going to be. There are cultural aspects to this. There are, like, I think all the time that, I'm an American. I was raised an American, and my mother is not. And there are different ways that we understand filial piety. There are different ways that we understand what one generation owes to another. Sometimes I think my mother wants to feel needed, but obviously if at my great age I still need her, then she's failed at her job, And these are the kinds of, like, very painful paradoxes. That's just like, yeah, you want to love your child as if they're your child, but eventually they become almost your peer, but they never will be your peer. Like, I think the best you can do is to be empathetic, but to a degree. You're still a person, you still matter, you can still have boundaries. I think that since you live close to your mother, I think it would be best to remove whatever aspect of your relationship bothers you the most. So if it's something that's like spontaneous, I'm completely making this up, I don't know what the details are, but if it's something where, like, your mom, like, pops up and wants you to do things, like, randomly, and you don't like that feeling of you don't know when it's coming, then maybe you set a date that, like, you have a phone call, or you have coffee together, or you have lunch or whatever, so that you know that that's what's happening. Because then that way you are still offering time and love, if perhaps that's the way your mother views love, without while saving yourself the difficulty of not knowing when it's coming, stuff like that. I don't know what the problems are. I don't know what you disagree about, or what is, what it is about your relationship that you work on, but you are two different people. You are growing and changing at such a rate that your mom probably feels like she knows you, but it's not true. These are things that you can feel resentment about if you want to. You can allow them to breed more conflict, or you can just try to help give you some more understanding. I don't know specifically how rational you are compared to your mother. I don't know if there are other details involved. Our parents totally have undiagnosed neurodivergences and mood disorders and personality disorders, and obviously there might be more specific ways to deal with them. But I think the best way is to remove the element of bad faith, to remove the thought that this is someone who wants to cause you harm. And I think if you can just hold in your head that this is someone who wants you to succeed, who wants you to be happy, who does not necessarily know or have the skills to give you that space, sometimes it's really, really difficult in the moment. And it will just always be difficult in the moment. And you have to just, like, forgive yourself for that. But I think if you can remind yourself and just focus on like on those moments when you're having a good time, or when you are connected, or when something works out well, or that this is your, that when you remember this is my mother and I love her, if you can just value those moments more than the frustrating moments, and then also do something to limit the frustrations, whatever your specific frustrations are, that would be helpful. But this is a relationship you'll carry with you for the rest of your life that will continue to change as you both change, because you will also not be static and in this stage forever. So you might as well accept that this is someone who does want good things for you, hopefully. If they don't, then there's a whole other series of coping mechanisms you might need a therapist to go into. But if you can remember, this is someone who loves you and wants you to be happy and is cheering for you to succeed, even when you don't feel like they are, then I think that might make it a little bit easier. And otherwise, you kind of just have to get through it. You just have to enter their reality for a while and do whatever it takes to to get whatever you need out of it. And if that's peace, then, you know, so be it. All right, I'm back. I've been to therapy. I've eaten. So do I have any different advice about your relationship with your mother? I don't think so. I'm actually going to reread the question, though, which is something I learned in high school. It's very important to do, just in case I missed anything. Biggest supporter, obviously loves me. We always come back to the same types of challenges. I mean, I think you're always going to. I think basically you're trapped in a time loop with your parents, depending on how willing they are to change. You know, some parents will change, maybe. But I feel like it's best to prepare like you're in the situation that won't. And so the only thing that can change is you. Maybe this is just a challenging relationship, but it's a challenging relationship that's going to exist forever. So maybe if you can identify what's most challenging and do what you can to limit those like extraneous factors, like I said, maybe that will help. I want to write a story that is very likely turning out to be adult fantasy, but I'm scared I'm not adult enough, because I'm not adult at all, to write serious TM books or anything that'll make other people take me seriously. Is that what you think an adult book is? Because I will tell you, I write for adults and nobody takes me seriously. I really want to write a good story that I want to be able to share with the rest of the world, because I love what I'm trying to tell, but I'm terrified I'm too young, and every time I write, I'm consumed by doubt. Okay. What makes a book for adults is not that it has like, it's not that it's like serious or important. It's that it is written for an adult audience. To me, that means an experienced reader. So I have learned that there's a difference between a beginning reader, a casual reader, and an experienced reader. I, for example, and probably most of the people watching this we are experienced readers. We read a lot. We identify as readers. Reading is something we do frequently. We read many books a year. An entry reader is like, you know, a young reader, a teenager. So when I'm writing YA, I'm writing for an entry-level reader or a casual reader. A casual reader is someone who picks up a book sometimes, is sometimes entertained by books, but might maybe prefer to watch a movie or watch a TV show, or just reads from time to time, doesn't really identify as a reader. And the reason I make those differentiations for myself is that, to me, when you're writing for an experienced reader, which is often shorthanded as adult, it's someone who has already experienced a lot of plot twists, or already knows what an unreliable narrator is, or already knows that you're not following a traditional trope structure or something like that, which is not to simplify more trope dependent genres, but just to say that you're allowed to do things, you're allowed to kind of be more fluid with the rules when you're writing for an experienced audience, versus like, yeah, you could define YA as as a book that involves young characters, but to me it's more like, who are you talking to? Who is your audience? If you're writing for young adult, when I'm writing for young adult, I'm talking to a teenager, which doesn't mean that another reader couldn't enjoy it, but I'm not really concerned with another type of reader. I'm concerned with, what is the teenager taking away from this? What is the young woman, theoretically, who's reading 12th Night or My Mechanical Romance? What do I want them to take away from this? And I don't necessarily worry about that so much when I'm writing for adults, because I assume that the adult in question already understands that I'm not trying to teach them morals. I'm not trying to teach them anything. I'm trying to tell a story. I'm trying to be interesting. I'm more concerned with, is this character interesting, than is this character good? Is this character moral? Is this character ethical? Adult for me is defined by its themes, not by its seriousness. Who is this for? But also, why don't you just write it? why don't you write it and then worry about who your ideal reader is later? Or like who it's pitched to, who it's directed toward. Like these are all concerns that you should not worry about right now. For one thing, as someone who has just written a terrible first draft, you might still have to do revision. You might still have to wrestle with a terrible first draft. Like there's so many more things to worry about before you worry about whether or not you were adult enough to write an adult book. You know what I mean? The idea has come to you. So write it. And who that book is for will become clearer to you as you're writing, but I definitely would not concern yourself with any of this. Once again, as Olivie Blake, I write exclusively for adults. Like many people do not take me seriously at all. And that cannot stop me, because if it stops me, then what are any of us doing? I'm just writing I'm writing my silly little stories all the time. Like I cannot take this so seriously. I am very committed to the bit, okay? And the bit is I'm writing fictional people and they matter to me. And maybe they matter to other people. But I can never make the assumption that they matter to everyone. Take it from me, an aged crone, that you don't need to worry about this. Just write your story. Who even cares? Lots of people being nice about my dog. Thank you very much. I don't want to talk about it at all. I've actually been thinking about what I'm going to do to replace that part of my bio, and I don't know, it's too sad, so I just haven't. I wanted to ask, how did you specifically find your writing style? It's so unique and I can never find anything like it. I'm so entranced by each book. The humor, the connections, especially the characters. It's weird to read compliments out loud. My goal is to one day create something just as unique and relatable as your books. I guess I'm asking, what kind of magic do you sprinkle throughout those pages? Aside from the mental illness, I don't know. It's pretty funny actually, because a lot of people say like, oh, all of these books are not for everyone. You have to get used to the writing style. And I don't know what that means, because I don't think of myself as like having prose. I'm just talking. Like this is just how my voice comes out when I'm writing it down. But I guess the answer is I wrote a lot. Like I've said many times, I wrote 4 million words of fan fiction, and like I don't know how many unpublished manuscripts and 10 self-published books, and like I just kept writing. And I wouldn't say that I found what felt like my voice. I think I identified something that felt like a voice by the time I wrote The Atlas Six and Alone with You in the Ether. But I wouldn't even say that I had found it. Like I think that Girl Dinner, like Gifted and Talented and Girl Dinner, which are both books that I wrote back to back, and they're both coming out next year, they feel very different from each other. And also after Girl Dinner, I started to question, like, I actually think that there was a time when my writing was a lot more economical, and that I could do a lot more in fewer words. And so when I started writing Kiss Your Devils, I started trying to tap into that kind of writing style. So I don't know that I have a voice. I mean, I have one. This is it. But I think that the larger question of how do you write something? How do you determine your form? That's just practice. That's just something that you find. I always think of like One for My Enemy is an outlier to me, because I was trying to do a lot while I was writing it. I was trying to find a voice. And I think I did to some extent. I think One for My Enemy is when I started writing sex scenes in that particular way that I wrote them in One for My Enemy, which is like sort of closed door, only because I started to realize like I can't pace things the way I did in fan fiction, where it was just like, let's have a sex scene and let's make it explicit because we have the time. Because in the books I was writing, they were fantasy. Fantasy covers a lot of ground and you have a lot of words to do it, but it's not, pre-romantasy, which to me, romantasy is a fantasy world, but romance beats. That's one thing. But writing true fantasy that has like a romantic subplot, that pacing doesn't always work with an explicit sex scene. So like One for My Enemy was my way of being like, and here are sex scenes. The characters are having sex, but here's how I'm going to express the sex to you. Very different from how I would have done things in a fan fiction. I think One for My Enemy, Masters of Death, I know was written around the same time as How to Win Friends and Influence People. My fan fiction, not the book. And then One for My Enemy would have been written a little bit after that. I can't remember. Maybe I was still doing Nightmares and Nocturnes. I don't know. But my point is, I've experimented with a lot of different styles. Also, a lot of the quotes for Gifted and Talented say something about my signature wit. I have no idea what that means. I don't, all of these things that people say about my work is something that they are interpreting about my work as opposed to something that I'm doing on purpose. To me, each book is very different, and I'm using different themes. I'm exploring form in a different way. I'm playing with scope or structure, or like how to, how to adapt the daydream onto the page. And so I would not so much worry about finding a signature style. That will be something for other people to decide for you. Just worry about, how do I tell the story that I want to tell in a way that is truest to this thing that I'm trying to say? What is the best vehicle for this thing that I'm trying to say? This one is funny. Actually, I will answer this on the page on Tumblr, because it's someone who's asking about clean, and they're asking about multiverses, or whether what happens in clean is a multiverse. But what happens in clean is a closed time loop. And I think it's just that it's like a sign of the times. We're in a time of like multiverse narratives, but there is actually a difference between a multiverse and a closed time loop, which is like in clean, you don't open up another strand of the multiverse where everything coexists at once. You're just redoing the same period of time. So it's like a clean slate and it starts over, which is funny. I don't think there are a bunch of different like time travel narratives that deal with these different types of timelines. But yeah, I think we've had some multiverse oversaturation, and part of that is my fault. I'm sorry. This one, okay, this is the last one I'm going to do, which is, hi, Olivie. I hope you and your family are all good. I love your books. I own hard copies of all of them. I was reading the acknowledgments part of the Atlas Complex last week, where you talked about feeling helpless and angry, which really resonated with me. Let me find it. I know not everybody reads acknowledgments, so I will read these to you. The truth is, I wrote this trilogy from a place of rage. When I began working on the Atlas 6, the 45th president was still in office, and any semblance of rule of law or human decency seemed to have vanished completely from sight. The most common cause of death for children in the United States was then and is now gun violence. A recently released carbon report had suggested we had a decade or less to avoid climate scenarios best described as dire. As I continued writing the series, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and for the first time, we found ourselves with fewer rights than the women of previous generations. Instead of solving world hunger, the world's richest man bought a social media site and ran it into the ground. Rather than fighting for the planet, rather than preventing the aforementioned dire climate scenarios, an astonishing number of my country's politicians instead mobilized the full force of their political capital against a demographic so vulnerable it makes up less than 1% of the total population. That would be trans rights. Yeah, I wanted a baby, but how could I ever justify it, bringing a life into a world where I couldn't promise bodily autonomy or basic safety or even the comfortable lifespan that I myself will likely get? What even matters, I ask myself, if the fucking world is ending, and why should we bother to go on? And the answer that took me 3 books to write is that the world is not ending. The world will live on. We mythologize ourselves. It's what we do as humans, but ultimately we and our lifestyles and what we expect to be the future are expendable. We and our personal comfort are not the reason this planet makes food and water. We are not the only species that counts. At best, we are only the caretakers. What matters then is how we treat each other. What matters is who we are to each other and what choices we make with the resources we're given. So this person is asking, with all that political rage, which only, seems to be worsens. We're watching a genocide happen in real time. It's actively worsening the dire climate scenarios that I brought up. I used to think that Democrats were good and Republicans were bad, but now I've realized that nothing is good, nothing is ethical. That being said, you still have to vote for a Democrat, unfortunately, because otherwise a lot of other people will be at risk. The trad wives, there's a whole thing here. The anger about trad wives, you'll have to read Girl Dinner, because I got angry about that too. I tell everyone to vote. Vote and we'll have a choice. Do we have a choice? Have we ever had a choice? Or are we powerless? I think this is stuff that I wrote a lot about this in Girl Dinner. The answer is this system is imperfect, but unfortunately we have to keep participating in this system until we find a way to break it. I'm in university right now and I stay awake thinking about the dystopian hellscape we're living in. When I graduate soon, I'm probably not going to get a job because the economy has been shot to hell. Unless I marry into an extremely rich family, I'm not going to be able to afford anything, even if I'm middle class. But on the other hand, who cares? The Earth's going to be gone soon. We've run the planet into the ground too. Does anything really matter in the grand scheme of things? Will my kids grow up in this world? How can I let that happen? Anyway, this is my long-winded way of asking you how you cope with the endless rage of existing, when the future is a giant question mark, when you feel powerful and helpless and you no longer have the ability or strength to ask, how can I help? Okay, so you should not allow propaganda to weaponize that fatigue. You cannot allow yourself to become this tired. And I know, again, this is, I wrote about this so much in Girl Dinner, and it doesn't come out until October, and that's very frustrating to me because I feel like I don't know, like, who knows what the political climate will be when Girl Dinner comes out. It will make it either much, much worse or much better, who knows. But the thing is, yes, many things are imperfect. Yes, there's lots you can't do about. And there's a point that I make in Girl Dinner that it's almost like you have to compromise. We know too much about how bad the world is. And actually it's in the Atlas complex as well. We already know all these horrifying things are happening. You don't even have to find something out. You know, you don't have to, there is no, like, the whole thing with the Atlas complex is there is no plot twist that there's been this like sinister villain all along. We already know that the worst things we can imagine are happening to someone on this earth. And that does make it really, really hard to get through the day. And that's why the message in the Atlas series is that it is not about hoarding power. Power is always exploitation, but it is about making the next right choice. And, you know, part of the reason that one of the characters has this huge corruption arc is because they start to confer power onto themselves, that they decide, I have the right to change, like that I know all of this is bad, and so I have the right to make these decisions where other people's life and death hangs in the balance. And what I wanted to play with there is this idea of, like, you either carry around this fatigue of I'm not able to do anything, or you think I should have a right to change everything, or that my experience and my pain and my trauma and what I am seeing as a flaw in this world is the only thing that matters. So a lot of the Atlas series is about experimenting in scope, because I think that scope is part of the problem. We know so much about what is bad in the world, and it makes it really easy to just give up completely. And, you know, I still, like, I'm talking about this like I have dealt with this, and I absolutely have not. The way that I deal with this is I make art and I expose myself to art. I was actually going to bring, this is a weird thing, but if you haven't watched the movie Strange World, the Disney movie, you really should, because it's a really excellent metaphor for climate change in a way, or like it basically suggests that we should, like, if we know what is breaking this world, we should just stop it at great cost to ourselves, because we can just adjust. Like, we can adapt to anything. We don't have to continue on the trajectory that we are. What the reason that we will probably is because so much of industry is dependent on it. But listen, if you believe that the world cannot be different from how it is now, then you're in their trap, you know? Like, if you really believe that nothing can change, then you're exactly where people with power want you to be, which is resigned to the state of the world as it is. You must be able to imagine a better future. Or not even that, you must be able to imagine the possibility that you cannot predict what happens next. What you have to take away is the certainty that everything that is coming is out of your power, or that it is bad, because it will make you tired. And you need to have the rest of believing there is something you can do, that someday there's a choice you can make where you can choose the next right thing. And it may not be a huge institutional change, but we cannot approximate huge institutional change until we have achieved something. This is a super small example of this, but ever since the book The Anxious Generation came out, I think everybody has been pretty concerned about teenagers having phones. One of my biggest fears is my son, like, discovering the internet. That I really think that we have mythologized the risk of the outside world and underestimated the risk of what can happen online. And, you know, the sort of wild west of the internet that's totally unregulated. My book I was talking about, Euphoria, it's about a digital dark age, and we can't think about it right now because we have to write the Gothic. So my big concern is, like, I want to become comfortable in a way that my previous generations weren't, with my son having freedom to, like, coexist in the built environment, you know, and to be out in the world and to have community and to find community and have some level of, like, freedom and independence. It's important to growing up. I don't want to feel the desire to track him, and I don't want him on social media. And lots of people bring up the point to me, but if all his friends have social media, then won't it just be inevitable? Won't you just have to give in? Which is kind of what happens in, like, Fleischman is in Trouble. But the thing is, I don't use social media anymore, like, not on a personal level. At this point in our lives, we don't post anything personal. We use social media less and less. We actively try not to be on it. And so if we're having kids now, by the time our kids are teenagers, I actively believe that there will not be as much pressure for young people to be on social media. I don't think that my son's friends will all have phones and be on social media if I and all my friends are nervous about them being on social media, you know? All of it just to say, we don't know what the future will look like. So we cannot live in fear of a future that is now. We're only capable of understanding what's happening now. And yeah, we can do as much as we can now. And obviously our resources are very limited, but we still have to act as though a better future is possible, which sounds super corny. Now that I've said it out loud, I'm almost a little horrified with myself. But you have to, this is what art is for. This is what the humanities are for. History is not a straight line. History is not a straightforward trajectory. Things change all the time. Incredible, like unbelievable things happen all the time. And the possibility that something massive will change in either a negative or positive way, that unknown is important because it means that you can't rely on these feelings of dread. You cannot trust these feelings of dread. You have to trust that you know the difference between propaganda and actual information. You have to trust that there are other people who want this world to be good. There are other people who are capable of compassion, that we are not defined by capitalism, that we are not defined by the ethics of capitalism, that it is not true that all humans are self-serving. That's the other thing about the Atlas complex. Why not just talk about my books as if they have academic merit? I mean, there's a reading list in them. The complex is an anecdote about humanity. So one side of the coin is a story you've heard before: genocide, slavery, colonialism, war, inequality, poverty, despotism, murder, adultery, theft, nasty, brutish, short, that left to their own devices, humans are bad. But then there's the other side of it, that left to their own devices, humans will inevitably care for one another at great detriment to themselves. Within every human being is the power to see the world as it is and still be compelled to save it. It's not one side or the other. Both are true. Flip the coin and see where it lands. And that's obviously meant to, create stakes for the book and for the series. But it's also true that there is no such thing as a universal human nature. You cannot rely on the fact that everyone wants this system to last. I think the fact that we can point out flaws in this system and no one comes down from on high to shut us up means that something will change. Eventually we will age into being the people in power. We have to. That's how linear time works. So you have to believe that things can be different. Not even that they will be how you want them to be, but that they won't be this. And I think that's the best way. That's the best way that you hold on to the closest thing to power, which is the knowledge that your choices do matter, and your relationships and how you treat people and what you value does matter, and that it has to matter, and that it will change. And we won't know what that will be, but it'll happen. That is a rant for sure. So this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next time.